Hello and welcome to Meet the Writers. I'm Georgina Godwin. My guest today is a British novelist, playwright and TV writer. He grew up in Bedford and studied at the University of Essex. He's written 6 novels, there's a 7th now. His novels include Tag, which was longlisted on the Wales Book of the Year in 2009, and it also won Media Wales People's Choice Award. 3 years later, Life, Death Prizes was shortlisted for the 2012 Costa Book Awards and The Guardian Not the Booker Prize. It earned him many comparisons to Dave Eggers and J.D. Salinger. He's also an experienced creative writing tutor and the author of Write a Novel and Get It Published. His latest book, Green Ink, explores the mysteries of a disappearing politician in the 1920s and reimagines his last day. It's a fascinating title that explores the world of politics with vigour, curiosity and flair. Stephen May, welcome to Meet the Writers.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's really lovely to have you here all the way from Yorkshire. I asked you earlier, why on earth do you live in Yorkshire?
Well, once you've gone to West Yorkshire, you don't really want to live anywhere else.
Well, tell me about that thing, because I think a lot of people who are not British listeners don't understand this really huge divide between North and South Britain.
Yeah, the north, I suppose, is when people think of England, they often think, and when they think of stories that are set in England, they think of London, and the urban cities. Sometimes they might think of the northern urban centres, or they think of the rolling hills of the Cotswolds, or the countryside. But actually, I think most people in Britain live in small or medium-sized towns scattered across the country, and probably the real soul of Britain is somewhere else. Even people who live in London have often come from the smaller towns in places like West Yorkshire. And, people have this idea that people move from the north to the south in search of the promised land where the streets might be paved with gold. And I went the other way, and it's... And where I live is steep-sided valleys. Yes, it's very wet. Yes, it can be very cold in winter, but it's also staggeringly beautiful. It's also, great walking country. I live in a tiny hamlet of 12 houses and 40 people, and so you have to be quite socially adept. You're definitely not cut off. And my nearest town's got 5,000 people in it, and that feels like an overwhelming metropolis at times. But yeah, I'm in London now, and I love coming here, and I love it. Feels like you feel a little bit like Jonah being swallowed by the whale. It feels like a real kind of energetic, hungry beast. You can feel the pulse of it. And Yorkshire's less often like that.
You talk about going the other way, and as a child I get the impression you did that. You failed at school, basically.
Right, there's going to be one of those. No, it's true. I wasn't very good at anything at school. I was ferociously shy. I wasn't very good at sport. I couldn't do acting, although I did later become a drama teacher. And the only things I could really do, I was an early reader, and probably then an early writer. I've a family that had its stresses and strains and its difficulties, and I think a lot of people who come from that kind of background, essentially where your parents hate each other, you can quite often retreat into a world of make believe and fantasy, and I definitely did that. And then when I got to university, I made the great mistake of studying English literature, which is death to any potential writer, and got distracted by lots of other things. And I think it's John Irving has a line. It says, "If you are a writer who doesn't write, you'll always be a little bit miserable." And I think I was a little bit miserable for a long time. And even after I left university, I spent 10 years working in factories and warehouses and bars and offices, filing and photocopying and basically being a kind of dog's body. And I got to 30 before I went I went to study to be a teacher. And I think if you've got a humanities degree, if you've stumbled through that, but you've got no direction, it's like your call-up papers arrive, and it's like you're conscripted into teaching. And then I found, to my astonishment, actually, I was a drama teacher rather than an English teacher, and that I quite liked it. And then I started to started to write again. And actually, the first things I wrote about were those 10 years of not doing anything very much productive. So while at the time it looked like staggering underachievement, it was actually research all the time.
Absolutely, and really good grist for the writerly mill.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you meet fascinating people. Everybody doing those jobs, almost everybody had a whole other life, and they couldn't wait for the working day to finish so they could get back to their allotment or running their judo club or restoring classic cars or. You know, so the idea that there isn't a creative life if you're working in a factory or warehouse is nonsense, really. You know,
absolutely.
Lots of thwarted geniuses, really.
And it was drama teaching, really, that brought you back to writing, because you took some kids on a writing retreat.
I did, yeah. I took some kids on a writing retreat, and because basically at that time, it's probably different now, probably should be different. At that time, if you took kids away, you had to have a male teacher and a female teacher. You had to both go. And I went along just as it had been organised by my colleague, and I went along. This was for the Arvin Foundation, if anyone's interested in writing courses in Devon. And and we'd chosen nice kids because, you know, if you're going to spend a week away with kids, you might as well take the nice ones. And I hadn't had much to do with the organisation of it all. And then they got on, they were writing, they were working with two professional writers, and I found my way back to it, actually, and then started writing some plays, and then sort of had enough of working collaboratively with the temperamental people that are actors who are very needy and then they need so much applause, and also producers. And so I thought, well, I'll write a novel because then I'm controlling the entire world and I don't have to. I didn't know about agents or publishers or editors or anything like that. I just thought, if I write a novel, and I was always a reader, I'll just control everything. And so I did that. Tell me about your first book, Tag. So Tag, which almost nobody has read, Georgina, is, despite it being on some... So it was the story of a slightly depressed 40-something drama teacher who takes some kids away on a writing retreat. So it's in no way autobiographical, obviously. But what I thought is, when I was a teacher, we kept being told that we had to, you know, we should look for the gifted and talented, and that top 2% in our classes should always be, the gifted and talented. And what you discover, really, is that the so-called gifted kids are really often have gifted or well-off parents who are prepared to take them to museums or get them a library card or make sure they get to bassoon lessons or ballet lessons. And actually, there are a lot of very, very smart kids who never get on that program because they're kind of difficult and they don't have the support. And I just thought, well, what would it be like if I took a normal group of, gifted and talented kids who will be essentially mostly middle class and put them in with one very, very, very bright but very, very naughty 15-year-old girl, and then see what happened when they were cut off from everything else. And so that was the spring of it. So I sort of wrote what I knew. But I did a brave thing with that book, which I would probably never do now. And it's probably... So I wrote half that book in the voice of a 15-year-old girl. And, that seems staggeringly courageous now to have done. But, got away with it.
No, I mean, and you might have been criticised for it now, this whole thing of staying in your lane.
Definitely would be criticised. But I think, write what you know. That is an important part of writing. But also... the real joy of it is writing what you don't know, finding out, inhabiting other voices, other personalities, other personas, finding out what you think about things through writing. And I did know, I'd been a teacher. I knew lots of naughty kids like that. I had a naughty 15-year-old girl of my own at the time that I was writing. So it wasn't that I was coming to it completely cold.
I think the technical term is, for novelists, you just make shit up, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, you're across all the lingo.
Life Death Prizes came out in 2012. Now that was actually an option for a film, and you wrote that script yourself.
Yeah, I'd never do that again, because it is, someone else has said, but it's very true as far as I can see. It's like operating on your own child. And people had said, oh, that book's so cinematic, it should be a film, and then I was offered the chance to do it myself. I didn't really know what I was doing. I had some help from the producers and tried to guide me through the process, but I absolutely hated it. Or basically, I had to butcher my own book and, try and because I realised that quite a lot of it happened in the heads of the of the main characters, particularly in the narrator, and that was quite. It's quite difficult to turn into moving, vivacious action. So I struggled with it. It didn't. It got quite close to being made, but not close enough.
And I mean, that was the year you were also write a novel and get it published. And I wonder if you could boil that advice down into a couple of sentences, what would it be?
Right. Well, keep going. Persistence is everything. Perseverance is everything. Keep reading, because you can. If I wanted to be a great footballer, I couldn't call David Beckham up and say, show me some of your tricks and let's work together on this, David. And but I can. You can read closely and over and over again. The best writers, the people that have something to say to you. Stay curious, I suppose. Talk to as many different types of people as you possibly can, and that's difficult for me. I conquered the shyness, because you can't be a successful teacher if you're going to remain a complete introvert. But the shy child is still in there, so I do have to force myself to talk to people, listen to other people. So boil it down to a couple of sentences. Keep writing, even when it seems hopeless. Keep reading, and my other thing, which is sort of controversial in the world of creative writing, I suppose, don't have any beta readers. Don't submit your work to your friends to comment on, or your peer group.
Really?
No, I would never do that.
Straight to an agent?
Not straight to an agent. Write it, put it away, write it. Because I actually hate writing, Georgina. I don't like it at all. It does feel like it's being ripped out of me. That sounds very precious, but it's a visceral, painful thing. I feel I'm bleeding out of my eyes onto the page, and it's quite a difficult thing. But I do like having written, and so I think, and I do keep doing it every day, because I'm scared that the last time I write, I don't want it to become the last time I've written. And so, write it, put it away, wait a bit, get it out again, change it, go through the process again. So I do send things out too early, I think, to agents and publishers and things. And I've always done that, and they sometimes send it back with saying this isn't finished. But I don't think I'd submit it to my peer group. It works well for other writers, but I think that idea of having a committee...
I'm interested in that, though, because you teach creative writing, and a lot of that is about sort of being with your peer group and workshopping stuff and reading stuff to each other. I also wonder if anybody can be taught to write.
I think you can save yourself time, definitely. You can save yourself time, and it's quite good to have a sort of cheerleader. It's quite good. I mean, I went on a creative writing course, and I found that sense of just people setting some deadlines for you, people expecting work from you. I found that quite useful. I found someone saying it is possible. I found that was quite useful. I found going to some reading events and hearing people read who were really good at it, that was inspiring, but not quite as inspiring as listening to people who were a bit rubbish, who've been published and well reviewed, and you thought, well, I can do that. That is definitely within the realms of possibility. I mean, it's quite a late starter, so because of getting distracted, and I also had children very young. I had a child really young, other children subsequently. And, so I had a lot of good reasons, good excuses for not working. So when I did finally get going, there had been a bit of a dam. The dam broke, and I sort of went for it and worked quite hard and forced myself through various pain barriers. So what I would, in the group, I'm sort of a cheerleader, but also saying, try this, try that, don't be afraid to experiment. Often on a creative writing course, people they've already started. They've chosen to go on the course. They're already in motion, really, and you're just helping that process along.
And I mean, it's great for writers or potential writers to have support. What about support at government level? Because I know that you're involved with the Arts Council. What's your role there?
I am a relationship manager for literature, particularly in the North, and so I support literature projects, festivals, individual writers, publishers, organisations that help writers. So I encourage people to apply for government money. I assess some of those applications. I monitor successful ones, make sure people are doing with the money what they said they would do, and try and make sure that some money goes away, because, it's a cliche, but talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. So you try and make sure that people who are not close to opportunity get a chance to get closer.
Is there enough money? I mean, there's never enough money.
No, there's never enough money. No, there's not enough money. And then, in fact, people who live in what are known as to be wealthier areas will quite rightly say, well, this isn't that wealthy. And actually, within this wealthy area, there are quite pockets of deprivation, or quite deep pockets of deprivation. Or I think what I would say, though, is that other people don't, at least there is money for the artists. And if the Arts Council didn't exist, you would have to invent it. And it is important for the preservation of the culture that we support poetry. We support things that don't work in the marketplace. But I would say that when I was doing those 10 years of other jobs, there were a lot of people who, the guy I mentioned earlier who was restoring classic cars, there's not a classic car Council of England where he can go to get money to work on his classic car restoration project. Although I have seen applications to the Arts Council for people to do art projects which are restoring motorbikes in a kind of artistic way. So I sometimes think we have to, as artists, writers, we do sometimes have to get over ourselves and think, yes, we would like some money, but there are lots of very talented and creative people out there who have no access to money for whatever their passion is.
Now, you've also written for television, and I'm absolutely fascinated by this idea of basically writing to order in an episodic way. Can you first tell me how you got into it?
Right, excellent. Well, so Georgina, I got to know the producer of Emmerdale at the time because she rang up and she said, "We got the wrong people dreaming up the stories, Steve. We got the they're all so young and they haven't been through any crisis. We haven't got anybody there who's failed at life. We haven't got anybody there who's gone through terrible relationships or had substance abuse problems or has got themselves in terrible scrapes. We need that on the writing team. How would you like a job?" so it's kind of a backhanded way of getting me into it. But, it's also good training because Emmerdale, those soap operas, they're 5 days a week and they churn through story. You've got to find some interesting, some just interesting things that can happen that can build over a number of weeks and months, can build to a peak, can die down. You're always looking for it to be on a kind of wave system. It's quite low-key, builds up a bit, builds up to a dramatic bit, but it fades again. And that's why you have, long-running secret affairs or illnesses or pregnancies are good because they're at least 9 months. And just to have the experience of making sure that, actors have enough to do. I mean, in the end, it wasn't for me. I sort of hated it, but I think I learned a lot from it.
And so when you're writing like that, I mean, it's almost always written by a team of writers. Yeah. Do you divvy up the characters and go, right, well, I'm going to do his plot and you can do this plot? Or are you all sort of intersecting and writing it all together?
Well, I was in this story. It was quite a sort of factory system. So I worked for Emmerdale for a year or so in the story. So I was dreaming up stories, but people would pitch different ideas, and often the smarter people would pitch them from. There was a guy who always wanted to pitch this story, and I was thinking that's from Under the Greenwood Tree by Thomas Hart. So it was one of the more educated people came up with the better stories, and but I think I sort of snapped at the end when somebody said, they said, "Oh, could you work out a couple of funny scenes involving the old people, perhaps around chutney or chutney?" So it was all sort of stereotypes and cliches in the end, and it's hard to avoid if you are racing through story at that. At that pace. And also something like Emmerdale should be playful, but at the time I was doing it, I think the TV bosses were panicking because the money was migrating from television to the internet, and so TV, which had been the dominant, they had commanded the dominant heights of popular culture, was losing its position. And they could see, well, where was the money going to come from if the soaps weren't generating it? So everything became very serious. You had to make sure that you were going to reach millions of viewers, And a show like Emmerdale should be really playful, I think.
Well, you found your way back to fiction, though, and Green Ink has been fantastically reviewed. You've got a wonderful blurb from Hilary Mantel, the spry, sardonic voice of the new historical fiction. It's set just after the First World War, and we start with this amazing sex scene between David Lloyd George and his mistress, Frances Stevenson. It's really very sexy, and what's interesting to me is that it's about female pleasure as well as male pleasure. I came up against a number of words that I had to look up, and it seemed to me that they were fairly archaic words for sexual organs. And I wondered if people did speak like that in the 1920s.
Well, I definitely spent some interesting minutes looking up 1920 slang terms for...
penis.
Yeah, we can. I never know what I'm allowed to say. Yeah, so for penis, vagina, the body parts generally. And actually, I went back a little bit earlier because my thinking was that in 1920, people like Francis Stevenson and Lloyd George would have been using slang from the Victorian times and the Edwardian times, and and they weren't necessarily hep to the current slang. So I did go, and of course, Lloyd George is Welsh, and it's had some access to some Welsh.
Cariad.
Yeah. And Welsh words for penis, and so yeah, I had some fun to do it. And it's I hope quite sort of realistic. Yeah, I wanted it to be realistic. These were real people in a passionate relationship. I had read Lloyd George's letters to Francis Stevenson, which are quite sort of intense and passionate and florid, and I wanted to capture some of that physicality.
So that's the background. You've got them. He is on the eve. He thinks he's going to be found out for selling public honours, and he thinks this is going to be revealed by Victor Grayson. Tell us about Victor Grayson.
So Victor Grayson was a revolutionary, so some would say the only revolutionary socialist MP there has ever been. Certainly one of a handful. He was young, charismatic. He won a by-election in West Yorkshire, one of the attractions for me, in the Colne Valley. It was a shock result that he came. He was expected to come third. He won fairly convincingly in the 1907 by-election. The people who were most shocked, in fact horrified, were the Labour Party, who had really didn't want Victor Grayson joining their ranks. In fact, they wouldn't let him sit with them on their... He stood as an independent Labour candidate, sat as an independent Labour person, was, as I said, he was a bisexual hedonist, is the phrase that I've used. And he, when he went to London, he got very seduced by the availability of alcohol, the aphrodisiac of power, the fact that he could always find a new warm bed to sleep in. He got expelled from the chamber several times. At one point, he said to the House of Commons, he said, "This is a house of murderers," and got expelled there. So he was at one time the most famous socialist in Britain, really. But he lost his election, the general election of 1910. And he was a socialist writer and thinker. By 1914, he was bankrupt, at which point he was paid by the British government in order to become a kind of cheerleader, recruiting sergeant for the First World War, thus upsetting a lot of his former comrades who were very against the war. But he also joined up himself, so he may not have just done it for money. He may also have been a believer.
The prologue of the book describes very graphically the death of a man.
Yeah.
And the way you write about the effect of the bullet, this tiny little hole that looks like nothing, but then you describe how his insides have basically been eviscerated.
Yeah.
I just found it absolutely chilling.
Brilliant. That's entirely what you should have felt. So.
But do we know if he died? Did he vanish to save his own life? Did he go and just become someone else?
Well, people have said that. I think that's unlikely because this is a man who was so vigorous and present and loved being on stage so much that the idea that he, did a John Stonehouse and disappeared and to live a quiet life as an antique dealer, which is, one of the theories that's been put forward is. But he may well have been. He was about to out Lloyd George and his cronies for the sales of honours, as cash for honours, as you mentioned. He did go out for a drink from his luxurious Piccadilly apartment, and we don't know who was paying for that apartment. One of the interesting things is, so there's been no body found. Some people think there's a file somewhere in the Home Office which can, or in Scotland Yard that can shed finally shed some light. I don't know. He might have fallen in drunk to into the Thames. But it's sort of fun to speculate, and there's nothing in my book that couldn't have happened, and maybe it did. Maybe he was bumped off. He certainly had enough people that had a vested interest in getting rid of him.
How did you come across him?
He was the MP for the next valley along. I mean, I'm in the Calder Valley. He was the MP for the Colne Valley. His story, although not widely known, is probably better known in West Yorkshire than most places. And he just seemed such a kind of intense and vigorous and complicated person. So I mean, in the end, I mean, I had, you've got Britain after the First World War. There's grief and anger, and it's a very volatile time. People are wondering if Britain's going to go through a revolutionary process, as was happening in Russia and Germany, and so there was the old order. The old ruling class trying to impose the old status quo onto people not having it. They'd been for the war. They wanted a changed life. Plus, we had the pandemic after that. And obviously, there were a lot of sort of contemporary resonances. But you had these, you've got these big, powerful characters that butt up against each other, against a really sort of tumultuous backdrop. So it was kind of, once you've stumbled across it, it's like, why wouldn't you do it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What's next for you?
Well, I probably will do another sort of forgotten byway of history. I'm reading a lot of stuff. I'm addicted to reading old newspapers, Georgina. So I read old copies of the Daily Mirror all the time. I read.
When you talk about old, how?
100 years as a minimum.
Yeah.
I mean, and I like all the stuff, not just the headline stories, but the adverts and the sports reporting and the smaller stories, the news in brief, the nibs, and I like all that. I mean, I have a New York Times subscription, but only so that I can read old copies of the New York Times. So that's something I discovered during COVID when we had a bit more time on our hands. I just signed up to a lot of, and just got into that. So I want to do something around the 1960s. So there's, I think what was happening, I had written these very contemporary set novels, but I think what happened is that I found what I had to say about the modern world. Those novels were essentially Steve looks at the world and thinks, why do we do that? It's just crazy. But I think I had less and less interesting things to say, and I don't want to write about smartphones or DNA testing or, that's sort of uninteresting to me, really. AI is uninteresting on so many levels, whereas the past is endlessly interesting, and there's so many stories that either you can discover that haven't been written about, should have been written about, or have been written about, but you can do them again because we now know more things.
Absolutely. Well, Stephen, you have created a really wonderful book here, as I say, recognised by many people as such, and I'm sure it's going to do incredibly well.
Oh, we can only hope.
Thank you so much for coming in to speak to me.
Thank you for having me.
Green Ink is by Stephen May. It's published by Swift Press and it's out now. You've been listening to Meet the Writers, thanks to the producer Steph Chungu, who also edits the show. And you can download this programme and previous episodes from our website or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.